Welcome to another episode of our regenerative future. My name is Chris Hovde, and in every episode I invite inspiring guests who all have in common that they act to create a more thriving world for all of us. So get ready to be inspired and get tons of concrete advice on how you can contribute to exactly that. Today's guest is Nada Ahmed. I met her many years ago in a volunteering event aiding money for people across, I don't remember which country, but all the world. Let's hear more about that when we talk to her. She is today an innovation strategist, a board professional, and an Amazon best-selling author with a book Determined to Lead, which I also read, and I felt she was speaking to me as well. So let's tap into that. Welcome, Nada. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, it's a true pleasure. And we would just like to kind of start to dig into Nada as a person. So you just wrote Determined to Lead. What throughout your life and your experiences made you become determined to lead?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think, when you see young kids growing up, some of them will naturally take the leading role, right? And I think a lot of it depends on, now that I have kids of my own, how can you make sure that you nurture that leadership part of them? I mean, in my book, I talk about everyone is meant to be a leader, right? Because we all lead in certain parts of our life. But it's also the experiences that you've had in your life where you were encouraged to lead, you were supported in your leadership. And then seeing how when you took leadership as a kid and then growing up further on, as you go into school and you go at work, when you take initiative, when you make an impact in other people's lives or wherever you are at, you get that positive response, right? And you get more accepted. And for me, I've always had that kind of ambition inside of me. I cannot just sit back and let things be the way they are. And a lot of that maybe comes from, having a mom who was a great role model for me, who always took lead, who always took her space, growing up in Pakistan where women are usually not working. And I realize now when I talk to some of my friends and they're like, Nada, when we used to come to your house, it would be very different because I would see your mom wouldn't be around and you guys would figure out, how to do things on your own. And then your mom would come home from working and she was like, I never saw that in my house, but I saw your mom working and that inspired me that I need to grow up and also be a working woman. So I think having those influences around you that not only tells you that, if you're ambitious, if you do want to make changes in the world that you see, that you can do it, that anyone can do it. So I think that's where my determination comes from, is having seen my parents strive for change, strive for a better life, and wanting to do that for myself.
I love that. It's more, it's almost like I want to say to all the parents out there, like, if you want your children to kind of overcome challenges, grow and develop and make a difference in the world, don't tell them to, but start with yourself. And show them what it actually is about. I also relate to the story growing up with a mother that was like at home with 5 kids, single mother, and then climbed her way through the leadership career and ended up being kind of on a CEO level for many years. And if she could do that with 5 kids, almost kind of racing from rags to riches, then who can't? So I think you're really onto something, like the people around us. But what do you say to those who are kind of maybe are less fortunate with the people around them?
Yeah, and like if you look at like my friend, right, who I speak to now, who used to come to my house, and she had a really good relationship with her mom and her parents, but her mom wasn't working. So you can always find these role models and a support system around you. So even if you don't have it within your parents, it's whatever you strive to be. You know, they say surround yourself with people who are better than you, with the kind of person that you want to be. And early on, you're right, like, and that's why, you know, especially in the US and even in many places in Norway, we talk about privilege, right? People who grow up in a certain community don't have the privilege of having the same role models as someone who grows up in a white community where everyone's a professional. And that's where I think we as a society need to play a role and make sure that we don't stay so segregated, that we give these people who are not so privileged the role models and the opportunities. And I know Norway has done a great job in creating that system where there are equal opportunities for everyone in terms of education is affordable, you know, daycares are affordable, so everyone can send their kids to daycares and schools and then still have a job and work for themselves. And I think there's a lot of work we need to do in the US, for example. You know, there've been a lot of changes over the past couple of years in terms of taking away affirmative action, which is supposed to help with making sure all the discrimination that has happened over centuries, how can we make changes to that by letting people in who haven't had the same privilege as everyone else, who didn't get, you know, private education, who didn't get their SAT scores as high as all the white people, but still allow them in because we believe in them and we know that through this education we can actually change the system. So I think it's about believing in yourself at the end of the day and still wanting to change your own circumstances. You know, like I look at my mom, she didn't have the role models that I had, but she created that life for herself, and understanding that we are the creators of our life. And we're not victims of our life. So things do happen to us, but then what do we do with the things that happen to us?
I think that's really, really important, but it can also be quite of a sensitive topic to talk about with others who are kind of less fortunate, at least in their eyes, saying that, but you're responsible for the outcome of your life. How do you deal with people who then see themselves more as a victim and will never buy that you're responsible for the outcome of your life?
I know, and I think...
And why do we have so many people who are struggling then, if it's just for us to take responsibility in our own lives and then everything will become better?
Yeah, because I think most of us don't go on that journey where we take responsibility. I mean, there are areas in my life for a very long period of time I did not take responsibility. And I was just running away from something, you know? And it's only when I stopped playing the victim, and we all play, I mean, we'll all at some point of our lives play the victim. And we are, because there are circumstances that happen to us, and sometimes very tragic things happen to us. And I don't want to say that you know, trauma will happen to you. And I don't want to say that, you know, it's okay, it doesn't matter. All those things matter. They leave an impact in your life. But it's also up to you to then, how do you overcome that trauma? How do you take responsibility for your part? And you know, like I said, I have felt like a victim too, and everyone will, but you just have to go on that journey and maybe give yourself that time to feel sorry for yourself. But then the next day and the day after, what do you do to claim back the life that you have? You know, I encourage everyone to, you know, go to a therapist if you can afford it. I mean, most people can't, but like have friends around you where you can be vulnerable and talk about, and process what's going on with you, and where you are feeling like a victim. And then, you know, go on this journey of discovering yourself and seeing, okay, this did happen to me. It wasn't my fault, you know, and that's what we talk about at the workplace with people of color, with women, that, you know, yes, microaggressions will happen and they're not your fault, but we are still in this system. So what can we do? We can speak up about it. We can talk about changing the system, but we can gain control in our own way. Like what I did was I decided I was going to quit my job and start my own business, because that was my way of taking responsibility. Now I cannot blame anybody else were things going wrong. Now it's all on me.
But let me then, I'm really curious, what happened in life that took you into that period of feeling like a victim?
I thought a lot about this when I was writing my book because I was like, in some way, because, I was writing it for, primarily I wanted to speak to the women audience, because I grew up in Pakistan and I grew up with a mom who was very feminist, and we were always fighting for our rights. Like, how do we make sure that the world is more fair? And my mom always said, Nada, I want to make sure that I have the same rules for you as your brother does, because most parents don't, right? They treat the girls differently and the boys differently, and boys have way more freedom, which ends up playing against them in the long term, because they end up getting in more trouble, where girls, because they're more protected, they end up doing better in school. But my mom also realized, like, we were living in a society that she just couldn't give us the freedom because it just wasn't safe. We would be harassed, and, you can't just let us out on the street. And just growing up in that environment, suddenly feeling like I was promised that I would be given the same opportunities, but I am not because of my gender. It just created that fire inside of you. And then you see that repeated, the patriarchy being repeated, like in the society where you live in, where the male is the decision maker, and women are not necessarily always treated as someone who can be participating in intellectual debate or be at the workplace and making decisions. And so since the very early stage, I had this rebellion inside of me against the system. Like, this is not fair. You could see the unfairness, not only for myself, but for all the other women, like women who came and worked at our house, who had abusive husbands. And then as I grew up and I left Pakistan and I started working, it was only when I really started getting into more positions of power and climbing the ladder that I really felt the resistance. Up till then, I felt like people appreciated me. They wanted more women. They wanted people who looked differently. But when I actually started showing up in a different way and speaking up and wanting to change things, it wasn't necessarily appreciated. And so there was, again, that rebellious part of me was awakened again. And, at some point I realized in a span of like 3 or 4 years, I had changed my job 3 times. And then I found myself in the same situation again, like feeling like they're not treating me right. I faced they're not accepting me for who I am, and just feeling like I am the victim, right? And that's where I paused. And before I was going to go and look for another job, I was like, what am I really running away from? Because this is a pattern now. And I mean, part of me was like, wherever I go, these issues will exist. So me just running away from one job to the next, thinking like it would be better, eventually I will run against the same problem, because part of me, part of it is also taking ownership, is what part am I playing? And part of the part I'm playing is that I'm refusing to conform, right? And I'm saying, no, things should be done differently, or I am not communicating and setting boundaries and expectations early on with my boss, because I also suffer from being a people pleaser. And I also fear losing my job if I set my boundaries too hard with my boss. So all those things kind of made me realize I am being the victim here, especially in my last job, where suddenly I felt like I had gotten my dream job, and then within 6 months of getting my dream job, I was demoted. And but it only felt like a demotion to me and nobody else, because everyone was like, no, that you still get to keep the same title. But I was like, no, but I don't get my team. I don't get the same responsibilities. Suddenly everything is being taken away from me. And I really felt like a victim. And there was part of me that really wanted to rebel, and I did. But there was another part of me that said that, instead of being a victim, how can I be a survivor of this? Yes, this was a traumatic experience to some extent. I mean, small trauma compared to what other people experience. But because I have been someone who tied myself so closely to my titles and my identity of what I do at work. It meant a lot to me, right? Like loss of your job. And for a lot of women and a lot of men, it's like that. When you lose a job.
For everyone.
For everybody, it's like that. People don't realize it. Because your job, your employer will often dismiss it. They'll say, well, it's nothing, it's not a big deal. But for you to, as a person, one, it's a big ego hit. And all your life, you're like thinking, this is who I am. This is my job, my career defines me. And when someone takes that away from you, you end up feeling quite empty.
Yeah, I feel that's kind of the part of the book where I like felt you were just repeating my own story and could really relate, because I think I was asked to leave a couple of times, and then it was for the third time like, hey, should we maybe find you another place, and like going around the porridge talking about it nicely, but then I'm like, heck no, it's not going to be me this time. What is the changes I need to do in order to both be me, but also think of a broader us and fit into the kind of system, but not kind of lay something on me that I shouldn't push or be rebellious, but like maneuver your way around things to achieve the outcomes that you want. And I think one of my turning point was when I started to meet meditation and silence. I went to India a couple of times and just sitting with myself and listening to me for once. I've always listened to everybody else. And then I realized, how on earth do you think you can be good or the best version of yourself in your job when you're kind of drinking too much? I was like also taking other drugs. I was like living in a toxic relationship, which was violent both kind of mentally and physically. But then, but work is something else. I can be my full potential there and just thrive at home. But of course, that's connected. So looking back, my brain was in a state of fight and flight and freeze. So I was totally unempathetic to people around me, probably. I didn't have any flexibility in my brain because I was in the primitive part. And I was probably even stupid, because research shows that you have 20 IQ points in average less if you're threatened or in a bad state. But then I couldn't see that then. Then I thought like I was at my highest potential. I see it almost like as a relationship where you fall in love. The next time you feel like, okay, this is falling in love. And on my own journey as well, I find like, oh, this is the authentic me. And then another year goes by and no, this is. So it's an endless journey and a lot of layers to really get to, at least for me, to where I take full responsibility of my own life, and whatever happens is basically how I take it.
So let me ask you a question someone asked me, and I found it difficult to answer. You know, she said, because I was saying like you should stand up for yourself, but then I was also saying to her that don't take things so personally, you know, because sometimes we end up taking things too personally, like someone said something, or, you know, my boss said something, or, you know, like when they took away my responsibilities at work, I took it very personally. And I was kind of saying I didn't need to take it so personally, but it was your ego that takes it personally. And she asked me, how do you know when you should take something personally and when you should not take something personally, and when you should stand up for yourself?
That's a good question. To me, it's quite easy to answer, actually. Mm-hmm. If it goes on and crossing my boundaries when it comes to my core values, then I will fight till death do us part. If it's just a person that I don't know that has an opinion about me, then I'm saying to myself, I care more about your opinion, and you don't even know me, I don't know you, than maybe my mother's. Of course I shouldn't. So if you don't matter to me, your opinion doesn't matter to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So standing up for people, standing up to people who matter to you.
Yes, I would say like if my close friend says something to me, it means much more than a troll on the internet, for example. But before it was the opposite. And then it's when it connects to my values. If somebody talks about kind of regenerativity, a better world, and kind of, no, we don't need to do anything. It's going to be good anyway. And I don't care about the planet. Like, then I can fire up. Or if it's about the equity, like treating people in a nice way and giving everybody equal access and opportunity and all that. And unauthentic people, then I can go off the rails. Because authenticity is also one of my core values.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think at some point, I think you can do both, also stand up for yourself, but then also by letting go, you're not taking it personally. You know, I talk about one story in my book where one guy who was probably the same level of experience as I had, but he was hired at a senior position, and he like signaled me out of a meeting where I was the only woman. There were like 8 men in this meeting and me, and he told me to come out and work on something else for him, and he wasn't even my boss, and he told me to do that like 2 or 3 times. He was like, you know, you don't need to be in this meeting. And the third time, like he was like, no, you shouldn't go back. Don't go back here. Do something else. And I just stopped him. And I was like, no, you know, half your team is in there. Why don't you ask them to work on this? Why are you asking me? And I just kind of said that to him, and I went back in the meeting. And, you know, I stood up for myself, but I still think, like, and I reflect on this in my book, like, I didn't stand up enough. Like, I should have done more. Like, if he was harassing me in some way and signaling me out as a leader, and I felt that it was because of my gender or maybe something personally he had against me, I should have voiced it and taken it to HR and spoken about it. Like, I think this is an issue, and I want you to know, and I want you to write about this in his records, and you know, make sure this doesn't happen to me or any other woman again. But I didn't do that because I was too scared of like just creating this drama and being a drama queen when maybe it was nothing, you know? And I felt like,
it's so important then to trust our inner voice. And that's also referring back to your question. When I'm able to be a bit centered, meditate, and like do my practice that's needed to really be in my truth, it's so easy for me to, in a work meeting, for example, I had a couple of people inviting to a meeting, and then they started the meeting off with going off the rails, attacking work that hundreds of people had done for like 6 months, which was amazing, well received in the whole organization, but they found a small thing that annoyed them, and they just kind of almost through the screen screamed a bit and was annoyed and like really agitated. But I just like said to them, hey, stop. Now I'm feeling that you are attacking me and expressing my feelings. I'm not going to be a part of a meeting where I feel attacked. We have done an amazing work with so many people. So if you don't appreciate that and talks a lot about that first, then we can talk about the things you are you don't like or you want to talk about. But the majority is like, wow, how amazing it is. If you're only going to correct the negatives, then have the meeting with another one. And I'm not going to sit here and feel attacked. Then it turned around completely. So what I usually find that we have we have unlearned how we communicate with our emotions. We only communicate with the spoken word. So we should more express with a spoken word the emotions we have within us. Or I came into a meeting where it felt like somebody had died. And I said, hey, now it feels like somebody has died. And you're just kind of, everything I say, you put it off in a kind of negative, depressive way. I don't want to be a part of this meeting if it's going to go on like that. I have not done anything. And then people, oh, sorry, it was so stressful. We talked about something really negative before you come. So kind of because we think that communication is about the spoken word. 85% is about emotions, energies, body language. So we should also address that. I see you're lying now. What do you actually want to say? Or this doesn't feel authentic. What is there behind it?
Yeah. And that requires courage, right? And what you're talking about is, being comfortable with talking about emotions and being vulnerable and say, hey, I feel attacked. Because at work, we're supposed to put up this like facade that we can handle any type of aggression. But what you're saying is like, no, like we need to learn how to have a respectful conversation in
Definitely.
which we can say what went wrong, but like if you sense there's a negative vibe, like everything is just going down this negative rabbit hole, it's not going to get us anywhere. It's not productive in any way. So getting comfortable, like you're saying, talking about our emotions and how we're feeling, and we don't do that often enough. And that's a very feminine trait, right? To be able to talk about these things. But we've deprived our workplace of anything feminine, right? And both men and women have that part of us that we need to develop and nurture. And that's why I say we need to introduce more femininity into our workplace, where we can talk about these things so that we can be more productive, just that the way you've learned to be. I'm very impressed.
Absolutely. And I think your book was so brilliant, and I feel like you say you're trying to talk to a lot of women. I think it talks to a lot of people, like in the majority as well. And basically everybody who's going through life. So what is like your key advices for the listeners out there to kind of dare to take the courage to lead in their own lives, in their own situations, and go from victim to a leader of their own life?
So the number one thing I can say, which is kind of really the essence of my book, is stop looking for evidence that you are worthy. Because that's what I was trying to do all my career, is like trying to prove myself. I thought I was trying to prove myself to my boss or to people who don't even know me, like far out relatives who've been really successful, or like friends. But at the end of the day, I realized, when my boss said to me, when I was negotiating my salary with her, and she said to me, Nada, I don't even know you. You have to prove yourself to me. And that was for the first time someone had actually maybe said that to me. You have to prove yourself to me. And I thought, who am I trying to prove myself to? And I realized definitely wasn't her. It wasn't my parents. Like, who is it like that I'm trying to prove that I can do hard stuff? And I realized it was just myself. I was trying to prove it to myself that I can accomplish big things, these goals that I've set for myself. And I said, what if I tell myself that I've proved myself? How would I lead then? And like that insecurity goes away, then you become more fearless. You're like, you know what? I don't need this job anymore, or I don't need to strive for this goal because I've already proved myself. I can go for something bigger. I can imagine even bigger goals for myself. And suddenly that insecurity goes away. That actually slows you down, because, like you said, that insecurity, like it's like our inner critic. All these things that we talk about to ourselves that we don't even know, that we're not even aware, that I'm only just starting to become aware. Like I think I'm a pretty confident public speaker, but the other day someone asked me like unexpectedly to take the mic and say something, and all I was thinking in my head was like, what are these people thinking? I'm not even saying anything intelligent. And I was like, why was I saying that to myself while I'm holding the mic? And even though like I've done this so many times, but it's like catching yourself when you're talking in that way, and reminding yourself that, again and again, because they say your belief are only the thoughts that you think repeatedly. So these really strong beliefs that we have, and I have a chapter in my book called Limiting Beliefs, that we hold since childhood, that we're not good enough, that I'm not good in math, or I am not organized, or I am not analytical. These are all thoughts that we've just told ourselves that have become our beliefs. And what if we replace those thoughts with, I am lovable, I am not flawed, I am organized, I have a great body. Like whatever are these things that you're continuously telling yourself, just revert them and say the opposite and repeat it to yourself. In the beginning, it will seem like you're being fake. Like you look at yourself in the mirror and say, oh, I love you, you're beautiful. But the more you say that to yourself, it becomes your inner belief, and it takes time.
I love that.
And I think for me, it's been that epiphany, realizing I have proved myself. I have done hard things in my life. I should not be scared of anything. And I shouldn't be scared that I can't stand in front of a crowd, that I can't start my own business. Like it's not going to be easy, but I'm not doing it because it's easy. Right? So
I love
think
that.
that's,
It's a really practical tips, and I think like too many of us are looking for that magical pill and magical solution. But as you say, it just takes hard work. Even though we think turning the inner voice around seems a bit fake in the beginning, it's the difference between people who succeed and kind of really love themselves is those who continue, even though it feels awkward, hard, fake, until you believe your own voice that's equally positive as you would talk to any of your best friends. So it's like a consistency, a persistence, I think, is what we start to lack a lot of in this TikTok generation, when you want immediate relief in 3 seconds TikToks, and then you spend hours on that instead of dealing with your own inner dialogue or other issues. But I want to take the kind of last part of the conversation into, it seems like many of your caliber, and I also felt many parts of my life that I lost the hope of corporate cultures and businesses, that they can actually include people who are rebellious, are vastly different, a big kind of spectrum of diversity in all senses, because they're basically not built for that. And then I see many of my friends, really successful friends, they don't find their place in businesses. They go out and create their own, because the businesses of today cannot kind of have space for them. Too big personalities maybe. But one of my aims and thoughts is, I've been there and wanted to start for myself, but then like, no, I'm not going to give up corporate businesses. I'm actually going to go in and be part of creating a culture in a big corporation that also can include the persons who want to kind of live on their own, make their own company, or are rebellious, or are vastly different. Because if we're not going to compete against starting your own company, we're going to not survive for the longer haul. So how can we be as attractive as an employer as you would if you could start your own company? That's the question I ask myself many times. Yeah. What is your take on corporate culture and including about differences of people, opinions, rebellious, whatnot, all diversity and inclusion in it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I know a lot of, corporate culture can be rigid, and in some way I understand that it has to be. It's a big organizations, their processes, their rules. It's hard to make exceptions, and it's all also very situational, right? Because you might just happen to be with that boss and with that HR person who is just not able to accept you for give you the space that you need. But someone else who's exactly like you would be in another position where they have a boss who's like completely secure and is comfortable giving you the opportunities that you need so that you can grow, right? Because in the end, we all want to grow and we want to get better. And so I think it's not fair to just make a blanket statement and say all cultures are bad, right? Like all corporates are bad. But generally, yes, they have a reputation of not being so inclusive. And I hope that changes, like for the very long period of time, companies have used terms like cultural fit. You have to be a cultural fit. And what is that really saying? It's saying that you have to fit in. Like everyone just has to fit in. And that was completely acceptable to say, like even 5 years ago. And I think now we're waking up, and it's pretty acceptable in many cultures, even today. You know, when I left my job, my boss said, Nada, you don't belong here because you need to be an entrepreneur. But I didn't want, like, he meant it as a good thing, but I was like, I want to belong anywhere I go. Everyone wants to belong. It's a very sort of inherent need for every human being, is wanting to belong. And every work environment should be able to create that. But I think where we've gone wrong, and I hope that's changing now in the world of AI, is that we've given more significance to the bottom line and our profits than to the humans that are actually driving the profit within the company. And I think you can do both. You can have a very profitable, successful business while also valuing the human qualities and the humans who actually drive your business. But you can do it in a more sustainable manner, because we've seen companies rise and fall, like Enron and a lot of other companies. Now we're seeing, BP have this big scandal ongoing. So a lot of these big companies who put profit ahead of,
or the whole government in Norway, all politicians
or the whole
are
government
corrupt.
in Norway. Yeah, exactly. Not only in Norway, but in many places around the world. And so, and the case I make in my book is, in this world of AI and the digital era, it's these human qualities that need to supersede, and we need to start seeing value of that. And leaders need to start seeing value of that. And what I felt was lacking is that we don't know how to measure leadership. So what we end up doing is measuring leaders on data that is measurable. So that would be just execution, like how many things did you get done? Were you able to produce this result? But were you actually able to grow the people in your team? Were you actually able to give them more responsibility? How do, your job as a leader is to make sure work gets done through other people and that other people grow.
And I think it's maybe also a bit about the weighing of those. If you don't deliver on the business KPIs, you're out of here. If you have a consistently bad leadership score over years, we're just going to work on it.
Yes.
So it's giving a signal of the importance of our people, I think. But we're getting to a close, Nada, and I know we could go in the direction of AI and digitalization and innovation, a lot of that, but I really wanted to tap into you as a person, make the listener get to know you, and also about your amazing book, which I feel talks to a lot of people out there. So if you haven't read it, read The Determined to Lead by Nada Ahmed. Yes, there we have it. Thank you so much, Nada, for being here. I just want to have a short question in the end. If you're now going to create a legacy for a world for your children to grow up in, what is the kind of world you want for your kids to grow up in?
Legacy. Yeah, I've been asked that question before, and I really struggle with it because... I still haven't understood what legacy would mean for me. But I think a world where, like especially thinking about my daughter, like thinking about a world where she can fully embrace who she is and her femininity. And also for people who are different, who come from different cultures, some different backgrounds, different sexual orientation, like whatever it is about you, that we can be okay with difference, but also that we integrate in a way people who are different. Because what happens now is all over the world, it happens in Norway and it happens in the US, that the Black community stays here, the white community stays here, the immigrants, they relate to each other, so they stay together, and the white. There's not much, how often do people go have dinner with someone who's very different from them? How often do people have friends who are remarkably different from them, who are different genders, different orientation, different race? We don't. We tend to hang around with people who are just like us, and it's comfortable. But I want a world where we are willing to step outside our comfort zone and embrace people who are different with an open mind and open heart, because I think that's where we can create a society that's more understanding and more considerate, is when you're the closest people to you have different values and belief than you. Maybe it's someone who's deeply religious and you're not, but you being able to accept that person regardless, right? And so I want the world to reach that state. I want more people to reach that state. Like, my purpose is that I want people to be able to look at things from a lot of different perspectives, so that as a society we can be more enlightened. And the only way to do that is through diversity, through people who think very differently, who have very different perspectives, and for them to engage in a deeper conversation more frequently.
Great. Let that be the last words. So we need to be daring to be more uncomfortable to make a change. Thank you so much, Nada. It was a truly pleasure to catch up and get to know you a bit today.
Thank you for inviting me to be here. It's always a wonderful conversation. I mean, I've seen you grow so much and be on this self journey of understanding who you are. And I love having conversations with you. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all the listeners out there to the videocast A Regenerative Future, where we invite inspiring guests who all have in common that they act to create a more thriving world for all of us. So until next time, see you and goodbye.